Welcome to another episode of Hunters and Unicorns. Today we are joined by Brian Souza, the CEO and founder of ProductivityDrivers, an innovative go-to-market performance management company specializing in building world-class, high-performing sales teams and organizations. Over the past decade, since the publication of his New York Times best-selling book, The Weekly Coaching Conversation, Brian has worked with over 10,000 sales leaders and teams of some of the world's leading companies, including ServiceNow, Google, Zscaler, Boeing, Nutanix, AstraZeneca, just to name a few. In this episode, we address the key to one of the biggest problem areas in our industry, management. We talk about what elite managers do better than anyone else, how it helps them create high-performing sales teams, and why the coaching conversation is being baked into the most ambitious sales companies on the planet. This is his playbook.
Welcome to Hunters and Unicorns. I'm Simon Kutis and I'm joined by my co-host Ollie Kune.
Welcome back to the show, everyone.
And it's an absolute pleasure to be joined by Brian Souza. Brian, welcome to the show.
Great to be here, guys. I'm a big fan of your show.
Now, one of the things that you're really kind of going after is helping managers be so much more effective. But help us understand the problem that you're solving and how you're solving that problem.
Yeah, so good question, Simon. And I think you mentioned the playbook, right? And a lot of most of your shows focus on the playbook. And the playbook is amazing, right? 20, 30 years, but it's primarily focused on the IC, on the sales rep, right? So with productivity drivers, I've been at this for over a decade, right? As you mentioned, working with some of the largest companies out there in terms of playbook, but other non-playbook companies. What we figured out is the high leverage point to move the needle in these organizations is actually the first line manager, the first line leader, right? So that's going all back to our research. And so why is this so important? Because to operationalize the playbook that you guys have been talking about for a couple of years now, and has been in existence for a couple of decades, you have to really focus on that first line manager. And so right now in this environment that we're in right now, people are suffering. And a lot of times they're suffering in silence, right? There's headwinds with the macroeconomic environment. There's a lot of challenges in the selling environment in terms of getting access to budget and getting access to the EB and closing deals. Reps are looking elsewhere. Attrition's an issue. Participation rate's an issue. There's a lot of these issues going on right now. And I think the person in the role that feels it the most is really that first line manager, because they're struggling trying to recruit people and find the right talent. They're struggling to find the right talent once they get them on to actually have time to onboard, all the while making their number. And it's like spinning plates, right? And I've been that first line manager. I know what it feels like. And so as you think about the organization as a whole, so much focus has been placed on the IC, on the individual contributor, enablement and everything else. But if you really want to move the needle on your team's performance in the organization, you focus on the high leverage point, which is that first line manager, and that's what we're going to be talking about today.
Why do you think the managers have been forgotten about? And why do you think there is a lack of training available to those managers?
I think that, I have a soundbite, is that the way we've been conditioned to see the problem is the problem, right? And I think when you think about it holistically, and I've spent years researching this, and I'm in the industry it was a training company, right? But I think the established industry has conditioned us to view the problem through the parochial lens that they provide. They've conditioned us to say that, look, the primary problem as it relates to sales productivity and sales performance is a sales rep or IC skill set issue, right? So you have all this enablement built around teaching all this laundry list of competency models, right? They're teaching all these skills and all this tactics and strategy to the IC. Meanwhile, there's no reinforcement out in the field. And so when you study behavior science, if you're not consistently reinforcing that out in the field, those skills are not going to stick, right? So what the industry's conditioned us to say is, look, view the lens through, here's your competencies for the IC, here's your competencies for managers, and here's some sales tech stack tools, but they haven't backed up to view the problem from a macro perspective and see that it's actually a systems problem. And so I think I'll give you one quick example on sort of the root cause of the problem. A number of years ago, as a friend of mine, he has a very successful sales training company, right? Focused on teaching sales training skills. And so we're having this conversation, and I was going through all the research to try and find out what is the high leverage point to really move the needle on go-to-market performance, right? Sales performance. And we were talking about it and said, look, what I've discovered is that the first line manager is the high leverage point. And again, he's the CEO over a successful training company. He said, Brian, I know that. He said, everyone knows that. This is a dirty little secret in the training industry. And I asked him, I said, look, if you know that the first line manager is actually the high leverage point to really move the needle on sales performance, why don't you build your curriculum around them? And he said, Brian, because there's a hell of a lot more ICs or sales reps out there than there are first line managers. And so he's built this model and this problem around solving all this problem for these individual contributors instead of focusing on leverage, which is to focus on the first line manager and building rings of reinforcement to make sure the behavior change sticks.
And so what's the consequence of that? What are we seeing managers do or not do? And how's that affecting the performance of teams?
So managers are struggling, right? I think even, look, you mentioned playbook companies. I've worked with some of the biggest companies out there implementing the playbook, and still, and these are some of the elite leaders, but still at scale, a number of their managers are struggling. It's still in pockets, right? And so the implications for these managers is they're trying to figure it out on their own through a lot of trial and error, right? They've never been taught the right approach. So what you have is, and the right approach, meaning this new approach we call the coach, right? And what you have is you have a lot of do-it-all managers or super reps jumping in and taking over deals. They're looking at data, they're looking at the dashboard LIs, and they're yelling at the scoreboard. You have nice guy managers that are sitting down with their teams, just kind of going through the motions, not without any operational rigor, no value add, right, to their people. You have micromanagers that are beating the hell out of their people, right, with data. And so you have very few elite world-class coaches who are connected with their people, right? It's not this contentious manager-subordinate dynamic, one up, one down, manager-subordinate dynamic. They're not on the same side of the table as one team, intentionally and systematically coaching and shaping the behavior of your people. And so because people, these managers, they have their head in their heart. They want to make an impact. They want to be a good leader. They just don't have the playbook to make that happen. And that's what we're really focused on.
In the most simplistic way, what is the solution in a very simple way?
Well, in a very simple way, what we figured out after, over a decade of research, we figured out, look, the one thing that really separates these elite world-class leaders of high-performance teams for most managers primarily came down to one thing, their approach. They didn't act like a manager, they acted like a coach. And so we went really deep into this, what we call a world-class coach, which is an elite leader of high-performance teams. And we've unpacked their mindset, right? How do they think about their teams, their people, their role, their job? Right? How do they create that high performance environment that's conducive to coaching and continuous improvements? How do they get on the right frequency of their people and get the most out of them? And then most importantly, the system, right? How do they consistently and systematically shape, coach, and reinforce the behavior of their people, right? And so that's what the focus is look, how can we take this elite, and you've interviewed many of these world-class coaches, right? They're mutual friends of ours. But how do you take what they learned after 10, 15, 20 years, how do you put that in a bottle and teach it that first line manager who's only been in seat for 6 months or a year? Or even that 40-year-old manager that's been an FLM or frontline manager for years and really is kind of looking to take his or her team performance to the next level. How do you make that process simple to understand and easy to apply? And that's really what the focus is.
So what does a coach look like compared to a manager?
Well, again, what we figured out is there's really 4 different types of managers. And each type of manager has a very distinctive style or approach, which impacts the level of rapport or connection they have with their people and their team's productivity. And as I mentioned, you have the nice guy manager, the do-it-all manager, or in sales, the super rep, the micromanager, and then this elite world-class leader of high-performance teams we call the coach. And so what it looks like in the sales arena is that there's a hell of a lot of do-it-all manager super reps out there, right? It's the most common approach that we've seen, and it's only logical, because that's what they know. They're doing what they know is how to close deals, right? And so there's a whole lot of consequences that come with that. When you jump in to important meetings and call and take over deals, when you aren't coaching and developing your people, right? There's a whole lot of consequences that comes with the do-it-all approach. Similarly with the nice guy approach, right? I can't tell you how many times that, it's important to be liked by your team members, but there's consequences if you're a little too nice. One quick example was chatting with one of the top reps at a playbook company, actually. And she had been to 4 different managers within the same company, right? And what she told me was, look, and she was a top performer, President's Club, but she would go into these meetings and they would look at the new business meeting deck and be like, that's perfect. Great job, as always. And she's like, wait a minute, where's the value add? This is the first time I'm showing you the deck. You're seeing 10 of these and I'm only seeing 2. Like, help coach me. There's got to be, I want you to challenge me in my thinking. I want you to add some value. And so you see the consequences for the nice guy approach. And certainly there's consequences for the micromanager as well in terms of attrition.
But Brian, obviously, putting ourselves in the shoes of these managers, they've got the burden of having to hit the number. They've got a relatively, immature team. All the pressure of them actually achieving their number sits on their shoulders. How can you get the best out of a team in this scenario when so much of that pressure sits on your shoulders to achieve?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think a lot of managers and listen to this are thinking the same thing, right? And I think it gets to the point of this, that one of the big myths out there that a lot of managers think about is, look, Brian, how can I make my number and achieve the operations part of my job, right? And coach and develop my people? There's just not enough time, right? But these world-class coaches understand that coaching and developing your people and achieving the operations part of your job, it's not separate and distinct. It's one and the same. They superimpose the two. So it is possible to advance the deals through the sales process to the next logical step on that important call, on that important meeting, while coaching and developing your people through the process, right? We have 2 eyes and 2 ears for a reason. These world-class coaches are constantly focused on maniacally how to move the business forward, but also they're focused on pinpointing and proactively observing their people, right? How are they thinking about approaching this discovery call? How are they thinking about approaching this new business meeting? How are they thinking about approaching this EB no-go meeting, right? And so while they're observing the deals and pushing the deals through the sales process, they're also assessing their people from a development perspective, right? So they're not just jumping in and taking over the deal. They're not just telling their people what to do. They're coaching them through the process we call the WCC development cycle. So they're assessing what's going on. They're asking questions that get inside their people's thought process, and they're coaching their people to learn while they're advancing the deal through the sales process, if that makes sense. So again, the important thing is, again, achieving your number and developing your people is not separate and distinct. It's one and the same. If you have the right approach and if you understand how to seamlessly integrate that into your operating rhythm and cadence.
Sorry to jump in there. You spoke about the 4 different types of managers, the do-it-all, the micromanager, the nice guy manager, and the coach. Is there one that's more common than the other? I.e., do you tend to see a lot of do-it-all managers, micromanagers, or do you think it's an even split across those different personas?
Yeah, great question. I think, as I alluded to before, I think by far the most common in sales is a do-it-all manager, right?
Yeah.
And that was me back in the day, right? 20 plus years ago, when I first started learning about leadership and was a first-line manager. And the reason why is because they were successful at carrying a bag and closing deals, right? And so that is the most common, is the do-it-all. And again, there's a lot of challenges that come with that approach, right? And what I talk about is, look, there's a term in psychology called self-deception, which basically means you have a problem, but the real problem is you don't realize you have a problem. And so the real problem is that you don't realize as a manager how you're showing up for your people. You don't realize that the person you see in that mirror and go into that office is very different than how your team members perceive you and your management approach. And this kind of goes back to me and my story, right? I had to learn the hard way that I was that quintessential do-it-all manager super rep. And while my team respected me, I didn't have the trust, right? I didn't have the credibility in terms of connecting with them. And it causes a whole slew of consequences, again, because they've never been taught the right approach. Most managers aren't aware of how their management approach is impacting their team's performance.
So how do you go about assessing that, and how do you go about helping educate somebody with that skill set? And is it possible to learn it, or is it just inherent? You either have it or you don't.
It is 100% learnable. I have seen and been a part of miraculous transformations, right? Where you have a do-it-all manager or a nice guy, and even a micromanager, right? When you break through, that's the question that people often ask is, look, Brian, can you really change my people? can I really change? And my comment is, look, change happens in an instant, right? And it starts with your mindset. And that's step number one, is to shift your mindset. Because when we shift our mindset and our behavior and how we perceive ourselves, our role, and our team members, it starts to impact our behavior and how we interact with our people, right? And so I think that there's been, this for 20, 30 plus years, this notion of a manager, and it's kind of this opposing sides of the table, right? This one up, one down, manager subordinate dynamic. It's I'm the leader, I'm going to inspect your deals, and here's my job as a leader, and I'm going to do this. And you got to realize that that is we have to flip it on its head and help people understand what their real job is to consistently get the most out of their people, is to align with their people. And you got to lead with the right intentions, right? And so is it possible? 100%, but it starts with your head and your heart, right? You have to get your heart in the right place and realize that your job as a coach is to serve your people. Your job as a coach is to make an impact on your people. Your job as a coach is to realize that one deal can change a person's life. Your job as a coach is to believe in your people more than they believe in themselves. And once you get grounded in the right intention, then you got to shift your mindset and realize that on any given day, there are dozens of opportunities to coach and develop your people. And so there is a playbook of sorts, is how do we collapse this process that shouldn't take 10, 15, 20 years to figure out? How can we consolidate it into a matter of weeks so that you're having these coaching conversations inextricably integrated into your operating rhythm and cadence?
Not everyone should be a manager, right? And I think that there is obviously this misconception that being a manager is progression. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think that management is for everyone, or do you think there are specific attributes that lend themselves better for reps to become managers?
That's a great question. I think that, do I think everyone should be a manager? No, I don't. And I'll unpack that in a second, but do I think that most people have the capability to become a great leader? 100%, right? Let me draw a distinction there. So, in the playbook, there's the 3 whys, right? And, why anything, why us, why now, right? I think to answer your question, I think the most important that current or aspiring leaders, if you're a hypo or considering, if you're an individual contributor, considering going into leadership, the question I would ask you is why? What are your intentions? Because if you just want to carry a bag, you can make more money without a lot of extra hassle and aggravation, right? And so when you get grounded and you really want to and have it you're grounded in the right intention with your heart, and you want to coach and develop your people, you want to get the most out of your people. If you're going with the right intention and an open heart and an open mind, and you're willing to take a step back in terms of learning a new skill set, because it's a very different skill set, coaching, leading people, getting the most out of your people, than it is closing deals. And perhaps we can talk about, there are some similarities that help, certainly, right? But I think if you're grounded in the intention, it's not about you. It's not about your ego. If you truly want to make an impact on people's lives and you're willing to make this investment over 2, 5, 10 years, I think it can be the most rewarding move you can make in your career. Again, if you have the right intention. If you don't, and it's all about you and it's all about success and it's all about money, you might want to hit the pause button and just stay in the IC, individual contributor lane.
Sorry, that really resonates in terms of, I think what you are referring to is intention, right? If the intention is progression because of the value it's going to give you in your career, rather than are you someone that are prepared to put others first? Because that's the coaching mindset, right? It's about really immersing yourself in the things that others care about and being able to extract and guide them through a process. Help us understand some of the fundamentals of coaching.
Yeah, so I mean, you alluded to one, right? I think it starts with 2 things. I think it starts with intention and application, right? So intention, are you grounded in the right heart, in the right mindset in terms of, what is your job, right? Are you realizing that your job is to coach and develop your people? I think once you're grounded in the right mindset and these beliefs, because our beliefs control our behavior, right? And so I have an important soundbite from the book, and it's, coaching is not just something you as a manager must do. A coach is someone that you as a leader must become. And it might sound like a subtle play on words, but it's actually really important, because when you change that word coach from a verb to a noun, that's when the magic happens, right? Because it gets to the core of our identity. When it's not just something you, like, I'm going to play coach and have this coaching conversation. When you internalize that and you really perceive yourself as a coach and you get it into your identity, it permeates everything you do. All of a sudden, you start to see your people and all those sales calls and all those meetings through a different lens, right? You start to see all those coaching opportunities that exist on every single call, on every single deal, every single day. And you're not waiting for that, enablement initiative, 6 months down the road to develop your people. You're focused on how do I develop them today, right? So I think that shifting that identity and understanding, that coaching is not just what you do, it's who you are. When you embody that and you're open to that, that's the first step, right? The next step, you have to create that environment. You have to create that high performance environment that's conducive to coaching, right? Because you can be grounded in the right intention. And I could teach you the skill set. I could even teach you the system. But if you haven't created that environment where your people feel safe coming to you and being transparent about the state of their pipeline, if you haven't created that environment where they feel trusted, that they can be open and honest about the state of this deal and all the gaps in this deal, if they can be open and honest about the gaps that they have in their sales skills, right? Then they're not going to be very open to coaching and developing. And so you got to change your approach. Starts with shifting your mindset. You've got to create that high performance environment. Number two, you've got to learn the skill set, right? And there's a number of skills that go into it. We obviously know Socratic questioning, performance feedback, but there's others like pinpointing, proactive observation. There's some skills, but it's not that difficult to do. Again, it's super simple to have a quick 2 to 3 minute coaching conversation. But the real game changer on this, Simon and Ollie, is when coaching isn't just happening on all these calls, it's when you consistently integrate and systematically integrate coaching into your operating rhythm or cadence, where you as that leader are systematically coaching, shaping, and reinforcing the behaviors or inputs of your people that drive the results. And so this is kind of the framework that we follow, right? Is how do we collapse time and teach these aspiring coaches out there, how can they become a world-class coach in weeks and not months and years and down the road?
How do you ensure that you don't break the boundaries of micromanagement, of having too many data points to follow in order to be able to draw to the right conclusions on where to coach? And how do you stop that happening?
To your point, something interesting, Ollie, that we've discovered is, going back to what we talked about, is most managers are blind to their approach and how they're showing up for their people. And we're actually I was in a workshop a while back, and we had about 75 leaders in the room, everyone from the EVP on down to first line managers and everyone in between. And we got to a point in the workshop and we said, look, so how many micromanagers are out there, in the room? And looked around, it was crickets, right? Not surprising, not a single hand went up in the air. Then we got to the coach and I said, hey, so how many coaches are out there? And instantly in the back of the room, one of the VPs threw up his hand in the complete air, like he's a coach. I'm like thinking, wow, that's interesting. So it's interesting because not too long thereafter, we had a break, and one of the senior directors who was sitting at a table up in front near me came up to me and he said, Brian, the guy in the back of the room that raised his hand, he was a coach? I said, yeah. He said, that's my boss, total micromanager, right? So the message that we're sitting is that, again, we're all kind of blind to how we're showing up to our people, but it's very engaged with your people while still giving them enough space and autonomy to operate and execute on their own. But when you're with them, you're coaching them and adding value. When you're adding value to people, when you're coaching and developing them, when you're helping them win the week, they ain't going to leave you, right? That's not micromanage it. That's value add, and that's what coaches do.
How do you integrate accountability with coaching and to really facilitate change, and driving things forward?
Not only did I study these world-class elite coaches in the corporate arena and sales coaches from playbook companies, etc., but I also studied world-class sports coaches. And one of them, I don't know if you guys are golfers, but is Butch Harmon.
Yeah, of course.
Right? One of the elite, right? Butch Harmon, one of the elite coaches, Coach Tiger, Phil, Ernie, all the guys back in the day, and a lot of the young guys as well. So I was watching Butch Harmon, and the interviewer said, Butch, how do you coach, whether you're coaching like one of the elite, the best in the world, or a recreational hack, like me, how do you coach them? And Butch said, it's very simple. I do the same process. Take them down the range, give them a bucket of balls, and then put a club in their hand. I just say, hit a few. Just hit it, as you normally, just hit a few. And he said, meanwhile, I'm standing back about 10 feet, and I'm just observing. I'm just observing them. And the interviewer said, well, what are you looking for? And Butch said, I'm looking for the cancer in the swing. I'm looking for the one thing that if I coach them, it will have the biggest, most immediate impact on their performance. And so let me ask you guys, why do you think that's so important and so strategic for these coaches to find the one thing that will have the biggest, most immediate impact? Why do you think that's so important?
Well, because if you can facilitate change to the biggest impact, that's obviously going to, by implication, have the biggest impact on moving things forward. And it gives you something to focus on rather than focusing on too many things. That's
exactly right. Because if I say, Simon, look, hey, you're doing good. Here's these 27 things I think I can help you with, improve on. You're like, what? You're going to feel overwhelmed. But if I say, hey, Simon, I noticed you did this and this. It's awesome. Hey, next time, try this one thing, right? It's doable. And when you try that one thing and I'm observing you and I proactively reinforce it and get it to stick, you're feeling good about yourself. So when you're feeling good about yourself and you move the needle on that great call, is that going to make you more receptive or less receptive to coaching in the future? More receptive.
Absolutely, yeah.
So when you understand these subtle nuances, guys, you don't have to boil the ocean, right? If you just get in your head and your heart, like, look, I am the catalyst to transforming my team's performance. And this next opportunity is a perfect deal to do that. And I see that there's some subtle little tactics you can do that will have a massive impact. Again, when you start to aggregate all these little seemingly small 1% gains on your team's performance.
With your experience, Brian, can you coach everybody in the same way, or do you have different coaching styles and techniques depending on the person that you're coaching? And how do you assess how to coach that particular person?
The important step that I think that most managers overlook, even before we get into coaching, this gets back to the create the environment, right? Is you have to get to know your people. You have to be willing to invest the time, effort, and energy to get to know your people and understand their hopes, their dreams, their goals, their why, right? You have to get to know your people and understand before you go in and start to get on the whiteboard and show them the playbook and how everything's mapped out. That's the question, understand their perspective on PG, on pipeline generation. Ask to understand their perspective on account planning and new business meetings and EB go there. Get inside of their thoughts and understand, because there might be some nuggets there that they know. And there might be some different ways you can coach and develop them. So I think you have to go in with an open heart and an open mind and a curiosity. And this is one of the things that, we had talked about off air, right? In terms of the similarities between world-class elite sellers and world-class elite coaches. Right? And I think as you understand, for you aspiring coaches or you current coaches that are looking to take the next level, you have to look at your people with the opportunity, just like a deal, and focus on getting to know them through discovery, right? Do discovery on your people, understand their strengths or weaknesses, really start to observe them, not just on the call, like, hey, did we advance this deal, move it to the next sales step or stage, but did they handle those objections properly? Did they have the industry knowledge? Let's start to pinpoint those opportunities and where they're strong and where they're not. Let's get to know our people and start to make deposits in our people and turn our people into champions. Let's do champion building on our people. And so, Ollie, to put a bow on this, I think when you really start to proactively observe your people and are curious about your people, their hopes, their dreams, their goal, their why, their strength, their weaknesses, you'll understand and realize that you coach everyone differently. And again, your job as a coach is to add value to your people. How I add value to you, Ollie, is going to be very different than how I add value to Simon, because your strengths and weaknesses are different, right? So you have to be willing to sort of custom tailor and meet your people where they're at in general in their development, but also where they're at on this deal at this stage of the sales process.
That's great insight there, Brian. Thank you for sharing that. Brian, I want to ask you, how does effective coaching help sellers be more effective in how they're building their sales process, or how they're applying some of those concepts into their sales process?
The big distinctions that I see from these elite world-class sellers is that they are not the lone wolf, right? They view themselves as a part of one team. So cross-functionally, they're aligned with their SEs, with their CSMs, with professional services, with their manager, collectively as one team, looking at the deal and saying, how do we take this deal from 2 million to 10 million? How do we land this significant logo? And they're the orchestrator, they're the quarterback of that process. And so I think if you will just let your guard down and elevate and sort of back up and view yourself from a different perspective, and let certainly your manager in to your business and say, hey, look, I'm struggling this account, help me understand where should we be. If you can take that same mentality with your manager to your cross-functional team, that's the multiplier effect. And I've seen this time and time again, because when you look at these go-to-market organizations, there's a lot of what I call organizational drag or organizational friction, right? Where you have the CSMs, they're not functioning as one team. So the sales leader's trying to do this and the sales trying to do it up on their own, and there's a lot of issues. But if you can be the leader of that of your patch and align everyone as one team, certainly with your manager, it's a game changer.
And what about actually applying coaching techniques, whether you're working with your champions or trying to kind of move a deal forward? How do some of the coaching techniques that are applicable within management, how do they also apply within the sales in the sales process?
Yeah, I think it's both ways, right? I think when you look at coaching, fundamentally, what it's really about, it's about shaping behavior, right? It's about getting people to do something. And leadership at its core is about influence, right? And so I think some of the same principles about coaching and how do you actually coach and develop your people as a coach internally, it's the exact same as how do you coach and develop your champions, right? How do you discover your champions? How do you develop your champions? How do you test your champions? How do you use your champions, right? So I think when you look at, you have to be connected with your champions as well, right? You have to be curious about them. You invest and make those to get to know them. You make those deposits in your champions. So the same principles we're talking about, a coach in the concept of coaching, developing your people, is the exact same as champion building, right? And conversely, so I say this to all of you managers out there, if you're a top leader and you were great as an individual contributor, chances are you had great champion building skills. Let's use those same skills to turn your people into champions. Let's use those same skills to do discovery on your people to get to know them. Let's use those same skills to make deposits in your people and turn your people into champions, right? So it works both ways.
Well, thanks ever so much for sharing that, Brian. So, what is the consequence of bad management, and where have you seen this have a real negative impact on an organization?
Losing one fully ramped AE, enterprise AE, that's well into the seven figures, right? Massive on attrition, massive on participation rate. And so I think that, again, for you go-to-market leaders out there, if you really want to look at one place to move the needle, look at that first line execution layer, that first line manager, right? That is the pivot point in the organization, and you can apply a lot of move the needle significantly by focusing on getting that standardized and optimized with those dynamics between the frontline manager and the IC.
So what are some practical takeaways or practical things that managers can try straight away?
Yeah, so look, I'd say number one is to really kind of take that critical look in the mirror and start to assess yourself and your management approach, right? Do you have those do-it-all manager tendencies, those micromanager, nice guy tendencies, right? So assess yourself. Number two is I want you to realize and understand that the one thing you can do that have the biggest impact on your team's performance and your career is to change your approach and want to become more of a coach. And number three is to start having those quick coaching conversations. It doesn't have to you don't have to boil the ocean with these elaborate examples of coaching conversations, right? You can have a quick in the moment coaching conversation. So the actionable takeaway is I want you to, as soon as you listen to this, on the next call, on the next interaction with your people, I want you to view the interaction through two lenses. One, how do you advance a deal to the next stage of the sales process? Two, I want you to assess and evaluate your people from a development perspective, right? How are they thinking about handling this particular situation or this opportunity? If a team member comes up to you with a question, what do most managers do? They jump in and answer it right away, don't they? Right? They sort of rob them of that coaching. I want you to hit the pause button and I want you to go in coaching mode and say, that's a good question. What are your thoughts? Right? You want to assess your people and just find those opportunities in everyday interaction to have those quick 2 to 3 minute constructive coaching conversations. You know why it's important, Simon? Because it might not seem like much, right? Just that one quick in the moment coaching conversation. But those 1% incremental marginal gains, they start to compact and magnify, right? So the message is, look, you can become a coach. You can have these quick coaching conversations on every single opportunity and every single deal if you're looking for the right opportunities.
So, Brian, I'm sure that all of our listeners would be really leaning in on lots of the topics that we've spoken about today. If people have found this beneficial, can you help us understand, or what is there? Can they reach out to you? How do your business services work? Or if it's an organization, how can people reach out and, get some further information on the services that you can offer?
Our primary is we work with, organizations for go-to-market organizations, but we also have, have a world-class coach academy where it's a program that's online where individual managers, if they want to up-level their game, they can go through that academy, right? We have group coaching programs as well for folks that want to be coached as a cohort. Maybe you're a second line or third line leader. And then again, we have full transformation initiatives with some really exciting stuff we have going on that we're working with some of the top playbook companies out there, where you can actually transform the entire organization's performance.
So, Brian, you are the author of a New York Times bestseller, The Weekly Coaching Conversation. Tell us a little bit about the book.
Yeah, so it's a quick, fun, easy read. It's about a sales leader called Brad, and he meets this guy called Coach. It's a leadership fable. Takes place in a dive bar, which I think a lot of your listeners on the sales side might appreciate. But it's really about that journey, about how is it that we, as that first time manager, like what does that look like as that do-it-all manager, right? And what does that leadership journey look like? And I don't want to ruin too much of the book, but it goes a lot deeper into everything we've talked about today on this podcast. But it's really a story about me and sort of my leadership journey, right? It's me acting as coach today, knowing all that I've learned and studied and experienced, having a conversation with me acting as Brad 20 plus years ago when I first started managing and learning about leadership. And so again, it's a really quick, fun, easy read, but it goes deeper into each one of these management approaches, the nice guy, the do-it-all, the micro, and especially the coach. And it'll really start to sort of put people on that journey and fast track that journey towards becoming a world-class coach.
Great. And how can you get hold of this book?
Yeah, the book's available on Amazon, most bookstores, but you can pick it up on Amazon. And it's like I said, a quick, fun, engaging read. I think you'll enjoy it.
Amazing. Well, look, we'll ensure that we put all the links to where you can go and get that book from in the description below. So please feel free to click on there.
So, Brian, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show, and I just want to kind of just summarize some of the things that have really resonated, as part of this session. Now, in our line of business, we speak with a lot of sellers, a lot of the most elite sellers, executives, managers, directors, the full kind of spectrum of individuals. And one of the things that they constantly look for in an organization is culture. They're looking for an organization with the right culture. And I think what's really interesting about what we're talking about is that coaching is so fundamental to the creation of a culture for excellence. And this is where management is so important, because the tone set by managers in their approach, the way they're interacting, the way that they're enabling, the way that they're upskilling, the way that they're listening, the way that they're able to support their teams to get the most out of them. It doesn't matter whether you are, within the C-suite or whether you're an individual contributor. This is so fundamental to the culture of an organization. And I think, what's been great, listening to you today is that everyone can develop and everyone can grow and everyone can become better and more effective. It's not about being better, it's about being more effective. And if anyone is interested to find out more about some of the specific techniques and approaches and the system, reach out to you. And it's been fantastic to get you on the show today. So thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you guys. I've enjoyed it.
So to all our listeners, thank you so much for joining. If you like what you've heard, please do subscribe to our various channels on YouTube, iTunes, and Spotify. All the links are in the description below, and we look forward to welcoming you back for another session very soon. Take care, and all the best from us all here.